Well, it's July 21st, 2026, and today's devotion is in Psalm 34, 34th Psalm. This is a psalm that David wrote concerning when he went to the Philistines and acted like a madman. And I believe he wrote this psalm through the cave of Adullam and to just give God all the glory for what he did for him, in spite of some of the issues that he brought upon himself. But Psalm 34:1 says, a psalm of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. And you can find that in 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 10 through chapter 22, verse 1. I'll go ahead and read that, where it said, And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And Achish was the king of the Philistines. They call him Abimelech. That's more like a title, like a pharaoh, a king. So you'll read about Abimelech throughout the Old Testament in a few places. And that's not a name, it's just a title. And so Achish was his name, and he was the king of Gath. And there in verse number 11, and the servants of Achish said to him, Is not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and he feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gates, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, you see this man is mad. Wherefore then have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? David therefore departed thence, and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And so just to give you some background here, you remember David, after he had killed Goliath, they were singing songs about him. He had killed his 10,000s, and Saul only killed his thousands. And Saul was envious, jealous of David because of that. And remember, Saul was filled with pride, and David was more of a humbled man for sure, but he became very humbled after this incident for sure. But here he had ran from Saul. He was running. He went up north of Jerusalem to the town of Nob. That's where the tabernacle was located. And him and a few other men ate the bread of the table of showbread. And they also took the sword of Goliath. And then David, to escape Saul, went down to Gath, the Philistines. Now that's the town where Goliath was from. And now he has his sword and Goliath's sword, and he goes into the enemy's place, and he thought he can escape King Saul there and maybe find some refuge, but I don't think he thought it through very well. When he got there, they recognized him, and they said that song to his David, who killed his 10,000s, and then that's when fear set into his heart when he saw King Achish, and he didn't know what to do. And then he feigned a madman. He was scratching upon the gate that he was spitting up, and had spittle in his beard. I mean, making a fool of himself. Pretty embarrassing. But he really didn't know what to do. And we're going to find out that David had turned to God in this time of need, and God did deliver him from it. Even though David was the one who made those choices, and he could have had to live with those consequences of those choices, but God showed mercy upon him and spared him of King Achish. God had more plans for David, of course, and in spite of his foolishness, God spared him. And that's where we begin in Psalm 34. Is David is in the cave of Adullam writing a hymn, a psalm about the incident where God had spared him. And he says there in Psalm 34, verse 1, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. David wrote this psalm, again, when he was in the cave of Adullam. He had just lied to the priest. that priest where he got the bread from and the sword of Goliath from. The priest was wondering why David was out there alone. He should have had more men with him, and he probably didn't appear to be, leading an army or anything like that. And he was out of sorts and out of place, and David lied to him. And then King Saul found out that priest had helped David, and then Saul had 85 of those priests murdered. And David found out about that after the fact, and I'm sure that it did break his heart for what had transpired. But here, he had lied to the king. He had acted as a fool with King Achish. When you think about it, most people probably wouldn't be praising God at that very moment. They would be probably embarrassed, because of their blunders. But one thing is for sure, God never abandoned David along the way. And David knew that. And that's why he says, I will bless the Lord at all times. That word there, bless, is not like, we give something of money or whatever it may be. This word bless means to adore, to kneel down and to adore. And that's what David was doing, is he was showing adoration unto the Lord. He had praise that would be continually be in his mouth. He praised God in the good times, the bad times, the indifferent times. He always praised God. Whether he was foolish in his actions or not, he praised God because God was merciful to him. God was gracious to him. And isn't God merciful and gracious to us? And should we not be praising God continually for what he does for us and be blessing him, kneeling down and giving him our adoration? I think we should. Now here the praise never stopped. David understood it was God who got him at that precarious place. God allowed his antics to work against the king, and he was let go. He was let go, and only God could have made his antics work. I mean, think about it. Spittle upon his beard, acting like a madman. He had turned to God, and he asked God for help, and God made that situation work. And that's the only explanation, to be honest with you. Spurgeon said, when it comes to praising God and being just having the praise upon our lips, he said, not in my heart merely, but in my mouth too. Our thankfulness is not to be a silent thing. It should be one of the daughters of music. And our praise to God should not be silent. Yes, when we're all alone, we can praise God, but David now is surrounded by a lot of family, a lot of men. They become men of valor, mighty warriors, but here they are in this cave, and they're worshiping God, and they're praising God. It says in verse number 2 of Psalm 34, my soul shall make her boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. Now, David had absolutely no reason to boast in himself. None. Even the song that was sung about him killing 10,000 Philistines almost got him killed. No, he did not boast. He had fear. He acted, he feigned a madman, and it was embarrassing. But he did have reason to boast in the Lord that delivered him from his fear. David had to humble himself big time. And whatever pride that he had was carried from him. And especially when he had a spittle running down his beard, there was no pride in that, believe me. Hiding in a cave, there's not a whole lot of pride in that either. But he was glad as he wrote this psalm. He was glad for what the Lord had done for him in spite of him. He was glad that others would hear about it too, because they would also be glad for what the Lord had done, as David shared his testimony of how God delivered him from that precarious place and from his fear. And he was able to share that testimony, and that just magnified their worship of God there, I believe, in that cave. In verse 3 says, oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. David desired for others to magnify and exalt the Lord with him. Corporate worship is always good. Worshiping God one-on-one is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. Even today, I was listening to some good godly music, and helped me to want to worship, God, even though there's no one else around. But when there's other people around, and we can share how good God is with one another, and just praise his name, and magnify him and exalt him, that's contagious, and it's wonderful. I love good corporate worship of God, when God's receiving all the glory and not man. There's a reason why they were magnifying God. It said there in verse 4, I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. David testified of what God had done for him, and that was an encouragement to others. Again, like sharing a testimony, and it was wonderful. Again, contagious, and it helped them worship and praise God, and that's something that I think we should do more, is talk about God and how good he is, and all the good he does for us. It's not just a genie on a shelf and in a lamp that we go to when we need him, and just some abstract concept. No, God is real, and he's working in our lives all the time, and we should be praising him and sharing of his goodness with others. And that's what David was doing. And there was worship, true worship going on. And look what happens. Verse 5. After David shared his testimony, how God delivered him of all his fears, and he was afraid, God wasn't afraid. Verse 5, they looked unto him and were lightened, and their faces were not ashamed. In verse 5. When Moses went to the mountaintop and he met with God, he came down from that mountain a changed man. He was radiant. He was shining because of the glory of God. When we go to God and worship him at his throne, we're giving him the glory. He's glorified, and when we spend time with God at his throne, we're going to be changed people. We're going to be enlightened. There's going to be no shame upon our face. It's almost like Moses. He shined the rest of his life, and the more that we spend time with God at his throne in worship, one-on-one or corporate worship, I should say, it's wonderful, and we are enlightened by it. The glory of God, and people see it. It's something that is visible when we spend time with God in worship. The fear that David had was removed, and now he's filled with praise for the Lord, and he was enlightened by that, and he shared that with other people, and again, it was contagious, and worship is beautiful. But there's a lot more here in the 34th Psalm, but I don't have time today to go into all of that. But there was reason for David to worship. There was reason for David to praise God for what God had done for him, in spite of his actions. God loved him. God took care of him. God delivered him. All right. I will talk to you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.